I don't know how to start this story any other way than just saying, never trick or treat ever again. You don't know whose house you go to maybe the last day of your life because of some sick twisted person on the other side of the door. That's what happened to my friends and me on Halloween night. My parents forced me to take my little brother trick or treating since my mom didn't feel like taking him and my dad was working late. My brother, Brandon, was 10 at the time and I was 13. I didn't want to take him because I was too old to be trick or treating, but my mom suggested I take Sophia and Lucas, who was my friend, and Sophia's younger brother Lucas was friends with my brother. I invited her and some of my other friends along to make it more fun. I wish I had thrown a fit and didn't take my brother at all, but at the time that sounded fun and I thought maybe we could go to a Halloween party after. I ended up inviting my other friends, who we'll call Lauren, Alex, and Neil, along with Lucas and Sophia. They didn't want to go but eventually gave in once I begged them to tag along. It ended up being a pretty fun night. We played around at houses, stopping and going inside some houses that were having parties, and we even got chased by clowns down a whole street. Everyone was nice and we were having fun, but Lucas and Brandon started getting tired, so we decided to hit one more house and then go home for the rest of the night to eat candy. The last house had the best decorations and it had a cemetery that was filled with blood and body parts. We admired how real it looked and took pictures to send to our other friends. We let Lucas and Brandon go up to the door by themselves since they were complaining about how we always walk them to the door like they're babies. We stood in the street and watched as a woman opened the door and passed out candy to them. Then out of nowhere, a car came rushing up to us and almost hit us. We screamed at them and they got out of the car and went back and forth with us for a while. A mom walking by was able to de-escalate the situation and the group of guys got back in their car and sped off, but once we looked back at the house, Lucas and Brandon were gone. The door was closed and the woman wasn't there anymore. We immediately thought they just went to another house, so we continued walking down the road, but there was no sight of Lucas or Brandon anywhere. We circled our way back around and went up and down the street even a couple of blocks over, but they were nowhere to be found. We all started to panic. Sophia and I the most, since those were our little brothers and they were our responsibility. We were even more scared of how our parents were going to react. Sophia and Alex suggested going back to the house and asking them if they'd seen them, while the rest of us knocked on every door hoping someone had seen them. After about 30 minutes, it started to get late. We panicked going from house to house, but no answers. Alex came back and told us that the woman didn't know. We asked Alex where Sophia was and he told us she was still at the house because the woman offered to help us look for Lucas and Brandon. When we all walked back towards the house, there was no Sophia. In suspicion, I went up banging on the door, sensing a pattern that Sophia, Lucas, and Brandon all went missing when they were at that house. A different woman answered the door. I began shouting at her, asking where my friends and my little brother went and what happened to them. I threatened to call the police if she didn't start giving answers that instant. With a grin, she motioned her hand saying, "Come inside, and let's wait for them to come back." She said that her friend and Sophia left to go look around, and we all followed the lady inside. The house was spotless. It looked like any other old lady's house, with cats everywhere, and smelled like cookies were just freshly made. The woman had on expensive clothes and jewelry. I asked her if the woman earlier was her daughter, and she nodded her head yes. She told us her name was Kelly and her daughter's name was Chelsea. She mentioned her husband recently passed away and left them the house with loads of money. I apologized for accusing her of taking my brother and friends. At that point, I couldn't imagine her or her daughter harming anyone. She then asked if anyone could help her get more candy from the basement. Without hesitation, Alex and Neil followed her. While Lauren and I stayed upstairs, she pointed out to me that earlier she said the woman was her friend, then later on was her daughter. I didn't notice, but once I remembered that was true, I shouted for Alex and Neil to come back upstairs. We heard some shuffling in the basement, so I called out for them a second time, but there was no response. Lauren got worried and begged if she could wait outside while she called the police. I agreed, but as soon as Lauren stepped out of the house we heard Neil and Alex yell for help. Lauren ran outside while I stayed trying to see if I could help. I yelled that I was coming for them. It was a long hallway leading to the basement with so many rooms. It reminded me of a creepy hotel hallway. The further I walked down the hallway the worse it smelled and the more dirtier the house was. The door of the room I had to walk past was wide open. I was so scared out of my mind that I paused before passing the room. My curiosity made me look. The room had barely anything in it. Only a television on the floor with a rocking chair on a colorful rug. The room was empty and I felt relieved not having to see anyone that my imagination made up of what they'd look like. I got to the stairs of the basement. I shouted for Alex and Neil to come up right now if this was a Halloween joke and it's not funny anymore. I made sure to look at the room as well to see if anyone would come out of there. Once they didn't respond, I knew this was serious and I had to be brave, especially if I wanted to know what happened to my little brother. As I began stepping down, a woman jumped out of the room and tackled me on the floor. I can still remember her breath and how bad it smelled to this day. Her eyes opened wide like a crazy person trying to bite me. I screamed at the top of my lungs as the woman laughed with the sharpest teeth I'd ever seen. Lauren came back inside and threw an ashtray that was on a table at her. By the time I got up, Neil grabbed my leg from the basement stairs. I helped him up and we bolted to leave the house. I told them I was staying to find my brother, but Neil said there was no hope left for any of them. A third lady jumped out of her room pulling on my jacket that I had on. She said that Ms. Daisy is hungry and needs food. Neil ripped me from it and we ran out of the house as fast as we could. We kept running until we made it to a store and I immediately asked where my brother was. Neil started tearing up yelling at us, "I think they're all gone." Lauren called the cops once we got into the store and had some employees help us. We also called our parents to tell them everything that happened. Well, everyone but me. Once the cops and our parents showed up, we went back to the house to show them and possibly catch them and get my brother back. But when we came back there were no signs of the women or anyone else. The cops thought we were pulling a Halloween prank on them until they confirmed that the blood and body parts from the front yard as decorations were real. I think those are from their other victims that were never found again as well. I told them what the woman told us their names were, but none of those names came up on file. When the police got inside, they found photos of what the women did to people in that house. I knew from those photos my brother, Sophia, and her brother along with Alex weren't coming back. Still to this day, my parents don't look at me the same. I can tell my mom's tries, but my dad is completely done with me. For years I tried to find those guys that almost hit us, because if it weren't for them I wouldn't have gotten distracted and my brother would still be here. Lauren and I still talk from time to time, but Neil and I stopped talking once he told me he knew what happened to my brother and saw him in the basement but wouldn't tell me. I guess it's too hard for him to talk about, but I can't be friends with someone who knows what my brother's last words were or if he got away and is still alive somewhere. At least that's what comforts me at night.
Since Halloween is my second favorite time of the year, I love to go big or go home when it comes to haunted houses. My girlfriend Tabitha and I host one every year with our two friends who are also a couple, Stacy and Jose. Tabitha, Stacy, and I have all known each other since kindergarten, and we met Jose in the 7th grade. We all started dating in 8th grade and have been doing haunted houses since our freshman year of high school and have kept going throughout high school and college. We've done haunted houses or cornfields every year. We try to have them at different locations and in different kinds of versions of what a haunted house should be. That's why that year we did a haunted hallway. All of our other houses have been successful, so we knew it'll be a packed crowd. We all live in a small town, so everyone knew where to go for Halloween, and it's an occasion that the town looked forward to. The guys that normally are our scary actors quit last minute, so we had to hire just about anybody that would take on the role. Most of them were Jose's friends from the new job he started. I was skeptical at first because Jose always jumped from job to job and would create new sketchy friends who weren't the best of crowds. Jose never finished high school, so his jobs were always jobs that would hire just about anybody, including people who were felons. He even had a friend group that jumped him and stole all his money one time, and another new friend who tried to take Stacy from him. I asked Jose how long has he known these people, and he said not too long, around a couple of weeks. I knew a couple of weeks to Jose is really just 1 week. I told them they weren't getting paid and that they had to stay and clean up after just to test them and see how they would react. They were cool with it and nodded to everything I said. They didn't speak English very well, but understood most of what I was saying, and Jose just translated the rest. Everything was going according to plan, but there still weren't enough people to scare the guests, so Tabitha had to be the only host and Stacy, Jose, and I had to be the actors as well. The night went on as usual, scaring people and everyone coming to our attraction, since we were pretty much hometown celebs for haunted houses. Everything was going as planned, and the men were doing a great job at scaring the customers. I was happy knowing that we pulled it off, and Jose met people who weren't crazy. It wasn't until we noticed more actors appearing on set with different costumes we hadn't approved of that I grew suspicious about why they wanted to invite more people without telling me. More men came that couldn't speak English or understand it at all, so I couldn't tell them to go away, and they weren't hired. I broke character and pulled Jose to the side, asking him who were all these people. He told me he didn't know, and he was confused just as much as I was. I didn't do anything about it and continued going back to do my job. Once the night was coming to an end and fewer people showed up, I closed half of the hallway and asked one of the guys to delay the message to their new friends that they had to leave and we didn't know them. They were nice up until that moment. Normally nodding and saying yes, they went completely silent, and no matter what I would say to them, they looked at me as if they didn't understand anything I was saying. Jose and I got upset by the 4th time I was repeating myself to them, and Jose translated everything I was saying. I asked Jose why are they not responding when they understood everything before. Tabitha was still outside waiting for more customers to show up. There was no way of getting to her to tell her to shut the place down for the night. I began yelling at them to stop playing around and get those men out of there because they weren't invited to work for us. But before I could even finish my sentence, 2 men came from behind and hit Jose and Stacy in the back of the head. I tried to make a run for it, but was instantly cut off by another guy who stabbed me right below my knee. All I could remember was screaming in pain. I watched as customers walked past thinking it was an act. I reached for everyone that walked past, but all they did was scream and run. Sometimes laugh or push me away. I could hear Jose shouting for me as I heard him sobbing hysterically. I didn't know what was happening to him, but it sounded like it was the worst pain imaginable. Once I realized no one was going to help me, I gave up. I laid there hearing Jose scream and Stacy yell for help. The men were laughing and speaking English fluently about how stupid I was to hire people I didn't know, and this was my punishment for it. The anger helped me gather up all the energy I could, and I grabbed onto one of the guests. She had a big group of friends. I hid within the group and held onto her until I walked past them and got out of there. I made it to a gas station and asked them to help my friends and me. They called for an ambulance and the police. When they got there, they wanted me to go straight to the hospital, but I refused until they helped my girlfriend and friends. I guess the men didn't know I was gone because they were all still there and got arrested and charged with battery, trespassing, and attempted murder. I smiled as I saw each one of them walking away in handcuffs. But my smile went away instantly once I saw Jose and Stacy in handcuffs as well. I was confused at first, telling the officers they were hurt too, and they weren't a part of this. But as I analyzed them, I saw no bruises, no cuts, or anything at all, even though I heard them scream for my help. A few weeks later went by, and a detective showed me camera footage of me being stabbed and lying there, while Stacy and Jose weren't being touched. They also confessed to hiring those men to kill Tabitha and me and make a movie out of it so they could become more than hometown celebs. I couldn't believe my friends for years would do something like that just for status and money. What they tried to do happened to Tabitha and me, and now we get to travel putting on haunted events. If they didn't let greed take over, they would have gotten what they wanted, and we would all be doing it together.
Halloween was my favorite holiday. I loved going to haunted houses every year and then going trick-or-treating with a couple of friends. My friends and I would have a sleepover at Ricky's house because his mom would let us eat pizza and watch horror movies all night even if we had school the following morning. The town I lived in had a time set from 6 to 9 p.m. for kids to trick or treat. Every year I would get the best costume my parents' money could buy, and me and my friends would ding-dong ditch earlier in the day using our costumes. We never thought we would face big repercussions since we were young and everyone would look at us as dumb teenagers. Normally we would do it and then just go back to my house to prepare to trick-or-treat since I out of all my friends lived in the richest neighborhood in town, which means the houses would give out the best candy. This year was different though since my parents decided to take a vacation for Halloween. They couldn't buy me a costume so I had to do the traditional ghost costume. Ricky matched with me so I wouldn't feel embarrassed since I always had the most amazing costume. My parents knew my friends and I would stay up all night at Ricky's place, and with them being gone they knew I would have the sleepover at my house with no parental supervision. I couldn't sleep over Ricky's either since his parents were out of town as well. Being the oldest child of a 6-year-old brother, I had no one to watch me since at the time my friends and I were only 14 years old. I told my parents I could watch myself and my brother, but they hired a babysitter for me anyway. Her name was Sarah and she was an old lady who lived across the street and had slept over at my house while my parents were gone. My dad insisted that I be home after school on Halloween since it was on a school night. He said I couldn't have any sleepovers either. My mom on the other hand was okay with me being alone since Sarah was just across the street, so she told her to come over to check on us throughout the night, but she still had to sleep over. Knowing that Sarah wouldn't let me sleep at my friend's house or come in late on Halloween night, we skipped the haunted houses and trick-or-treating because we thought we were too old to do that anyway. We instead dressed up and pretended we were going trick-or-treating and left the house to drive around ding-dong ditching since that was our favorite part of the night. We agreed it would be better this year since we were doing it at night, not in the middle of the day. Ricky stole his parents' car to take the 5 of us and drove to a wealthy neighborhood about 20 miles out of town where older people lived, hoping to scare old stuck-up people. We parked on a different block so our car wouldn't get recognized and went from door to door scaring everyone. It was around 6 p.m. and we were surprised that there were barely any kids out in this neighborhood since it was a wealthy part of this town, and in our town, the streets are filled with kids in wealthy neighborhoods. But that didn't stop us. We came up with an idea to knock until we saw someone coming to the door, run away to hide, then come out of hiding and run to the house, and normally the person would scream, shut their door, and lock it. We would sometimes go further to banging on their door or twisting the door handle to make it seem like we were breaking in, but run away when they threatened to call the police. We did that to every house that night, scaring everyone that was home. It was the best one we ever did and we didn't want to stop. But as time passed, it was getting late. So we decided to do one more house and then go back to my house. My friends and I knew we had to be home by 9 since that's when everything for Halloween closes. The last house was further away than all the rest of the houses. It was dirty and a little run down, which was different from the other houses on the street. It looked as if the house was abandoned almost. We were kind of unsure if this was a good idea, and Ricky said, I did not steal my parents' car to drive a bunch of little girls to do this. My other friend Steve, who was always competing with Ricky, started running to the house yelling, "Race you little girls to it." We all began running towards the house, but before we could even make it, a woman drove past us while saying, "Stupid kids, you remind me of myself when I was younger. But you should go home, the last house hates being bothered. And you wouldn't want to wake whatever's inside it." We all laughed thinking it was a joke, but she had a straight face and just kept on driving, not even reacting to our laughter. My other friends that were with us, Oliver and Justin, didn't know if it would be a good idea to do this house since it looked so different from the other houses, and the woman told us not to. We stood in front of the house discussing what we should do, then suddenly the porch light turned on. We ducked behind some cars that were on the street from the previous house and waited for a few minutes to scare the owner. We waited for what felt like 15 minutes because Oliver was too scared and got into a fight with Ricky, asking him to take us back home. Ricky threw the keys at Oliver, calling him a chicken, and he ended up getting mad that no one else wanted to go home and walked back to the car to wait for us. The rest of us went back in front of the house, rang the doorbell, and ran behind the car. Ricky ran behind the house to bang on the back door and then ran behind the bushes in the backyard to hide. No one opened the door, so we did it again and no answer. We went for it a couple of times and still no answer. No lights turning on inside the house or no shadows walking past the windows. We realized that no one was home and the light probably had a timer on it, or whoever was inside was asleep. We started walking back to the car and Ricky yelled at us to come back and try again. We thought it was pointless and told Ricky we'd watch and let him bang on the door again. Ricky kept banging on the door and Justin went into the backyard to do it with him. Steve and I stayed behind the car laughing at how big of fools Ricky and Justin were making of themselves. We yelled for them to come back and leave, and as we were walking back to the car Ricky ran back for one more knock and then we heard a scream coming from the house and then a door slam. We all ran back to see if Ricky was just messing with us or finally got someone to open the door, but Ricky wasn't there. Justin ran into the backyard yelling for Ricky to quit messing with us, but then the front door of the house opened. We could hear Ricky screaming for help inside, and then a tall man wearing all black and the creepiest mask I've ever seen ran out of the house. We all started running as fast as we could back to the car. I managed to get enough speed and hide in someone else's backyard. Justin hid in a trash can at the house beside me and Steve kept running around every street in the neighborhood. The man started to only run after Steve, and that gave Justin and me time to run back to the car. Justin and I jumped in the car and told Oliver to drive and save Steve. We drove around each street but didn't see him. Oliver started screaming for Steve but there was no answer. We decided to go down by the house to see if we could get Ricky, but Steve jumped in front of the car breathing heavily. He said he lost him and we yelled for Steve to jump in so we could save Ricky. He started laughing while mocking the man. I shouted at him to get in the car because we had to save Ricky, but as soon as Steve was walking up to the car the man ran up and opened the driver's door, snatching Oliver out of the car. I hate explaining this part. I still regret that night and wish I could do it all over again. But when Steve got into the car, we drove away. All I could remember was Oliver's face as we drove away. He screaming for us to come and save him. And remembering how Oliver didn't even want to go to that house and wanted to go home. His screams still haunt me to this day. As Steve drove away, Justin cussed him out the whole ride home while implying how Oliver went back for him, so how could we leave him? Steve stayed quiet while getting an earful from Justin. When we got back to my house we all went inside knowing what we did. Sarah asked if it was fun but I couldn't answer. All I could do was stare. Steve answered for me telling her it was okay, and we all went upstairs into my room not saying a word to each other for hours. They didn't want to go home and be alone, but none of us wanted to talk either. After a while, Steve and Justin started fighting all night about Oliver while I tried to sleep hoping that it was a bad dream. I ended the fight telling them we'll go back tomorrow with cops and most likely that guy was just trying to scare us and teach us all a lesson. They agreed and everyone used what I said as a way to relax. I dozed off a couple of times during the night but could never sleep. Especially with all the noise Sarah was making downstairs passing out candy, it would jump all of us up that I woke up in the middle of the night wanting to get something to drink. Also, give a reason to move around since trying to sleep wasn't working. I asked Justin if he could go with me since he and I were the only ones awake. We went downstairs into the living room and talked about what happened. We talked about how it was so easy for Steve to drive away like that, leaving Oliver behind. Finally, we were able to calm down after discussing again that it was just someone trying to teach us kids a lesson and Oliver and Ricky are probably in on it. I know it was stupid to think that, but being young I couldn't think this would be happening to me and my friends. While talking about helping our friends the next day we heard the doorbell ring. It sent shivers down my spine wondering who could be trick-or-treating at midnight. I went to the door and got up the courage to look through the peephole but no one was there. Then we heard a bang on the back door. Bang bang twice and then it got quiet. I couldn't help but be paranoid thinking it was the man from the house. Justin whispered, there would be no way he knew where you lived. I whispered back to him, and how could he follow us when the last thing I saw was Oliver being carried away? Then suddenly the doorbell rang and the banging on the back door was right after the other. Steve and my brother then came running down the stairs, and instantly we all three knew he was doing the same thing as we were doing to his house, and then my heart dropped as I realized that's the man from the house. We turned off all the lights and I ran upstairs to get Sarah. I checked every room but couldn't find her. I began to wonder if she was just playing a Halloween joke on us until I went back downstairs. My brother crying and Justin, covering his eyes as Steve stands over Sarah's body in the pantry of the kitchen. Justin and I looked at each other as I contemplated, is that what we had been hearing down the stairs earlier? My body grew with fear and I couldn't move as I realized he already knew his way inside. Then we all heard the back door open and shut. I jumped in the pantry and closed the door while the others hid in different spots in the house. In the most disgusting and inhumane way, he said, "I know you heard the screams of your friends. I wish you heard the screams of when they were being ripped apart." I couldn't believe what I heard. I became angry knowing what this man did to my friends. I wish I could have done something that night. I heard him walking closer to the kitchen, and as I was about to jump out and fight for my life, I heard Steve and my brother scream. I jumped out to see his face. It was all cut up and he only had one eye. He was holding my brother while Steve was trying to make him let my brother go. He pushed Steve out of the way and ran out of the house. Justin and I chased after him, running towards a car that he was shoving my brother into. I fell and my head hit the concrete. I could feel blood coming down my face and it was hard to move, but I didn't care. My only mission was to save my brother. I crawled to the car trying to save my brother, but he already threw him and Justin in the car. He was coming back for me until Steve burst out of the house with an axe from our shed, but the man got in his car and left. We called the cops so they could try to find them, but Oliver, Ricky, Justin, and even my brother have never been found again. I still search for all of them to this day. The biggest regret of my life was not listening to what my parents wanted. My dad used to always say Halloween is when the crazies come out, but I never listened to him. I've grown into an adult since then and had children. I now tell them the same thing, and over my dead body will I ever let them celebrate a day as horrible as Halloween.